this video I will teach you how to play the Semi-Slav defense, and this is an amazing opening against the Queen's Gambit because it's pretty easy to learn. There are basically only 3 main variations you need to know, and black has really good chances in all of them. But we're gonna continue with this move order, d4, d5, and then against c4 we're gonna play this move pawn to c6, which is the Slav defense, and then soon we will transpose into the Semi-Slav defense. Of course, white doesn't have to play this. They could also probably play for a London system and not push this pawn to c4. Against that, you could still play the Semi-Slav, but you probably have some other aggressive options as well, which I will cover in future videos. Today we're really going to focus on beating the Queen's Gambit. So white has a couple of different moves here. Usually they will play knight to c3. This is the most common move, just because of course this knight puts pressure here in the center on our d5 pawn, which we're currently protecting with our pawn on c6. That's the main goal why we played pawn to c6, to defend this pawn. We're going to continue with knight to c3, but anything else basically transposes to the 3 main variations I will teach you. If white ever captures your pawn, well, you can just capture back with your pawn. That is why you played it here in the first place. And this is known as the exchange variation, which we will cover a bit in the end as well. So let's go knight to c3. And as black here, I like to play the move pawn to e6, which is basically the accelerated Semi-Slav defense. The irregular Semi-Slav usually happens after knight f6 and then e6 later. But I like to go immediately for e6, building this triangle of pawns in the center, so we're basically overprotecting this d5 pawn, so that if white ever captures, we're actually going to capture here with the e pawn. We want to build our pawn chain towards the enemy king, so we want to have them facing the enemy king, so that in the future we can also drop some pieces in there. So that is our main plan. White will usually continue with the move knight f3. They can of course also play bishop f4 or pawn to e3, but we will cover those variations as well in this video. So knight f3, and then here we play our knight to f6. And then most of the time you will get this line where they play bishop g5. And this, what I'm showing you now first, is the most played variation here in the Semi-Slav defense. And it makes sense for white to do this, because basically white wants to push pawn to e3, put the bishop here, and maybe push pawn to d4 in some variations. But if they ever play e3, well, they are blocking their own bishop. So it makes sense for white to get out the bishop, pin the knight, and also reinforce their pressure here on the center. And we will immediately play this move pawn h6 here, attacking the enemy bishop. And most likely you will get them to just drop back, because they want to drop back and then still keep the pin. That is 70% of games you will get them to drop back. So that is what we will continue with. Every now and then you will also get them to exchange on f6. If they do this, basically you can just capture with the queen. Your queen is pretty safe here and also putting pressure on the center. Most likely the game will continue with pawn to e3. Then you can develop the bishop to d6, because, well, their bishop is already gone, so we can develop the bishop to an active square, bishop d3, and then we are going to capture here on c4. And that is in general an idea in this Semi-Slav, and that is after white moves their bishop, we can capture on c4, basically because we are forcing them to move the bishop twice. So this is a way, as black, we can win a tempo by capturing this pawn a little bit later, and then this bishop is not really that good here. Most likely they will have to go back anyways to this d3 square. Just a quick variation, knight e7, castles, castles, queen c2, and then we are gonna play queen e7, because you don't want to keep your queen here too long, otherwise you're gonna run into this knight fork, which is already possible here as well, but you can always drop back. But I would say before they go for it here, if they haven't gone for it yet, you can still drop back your queen. If white plays this earlier, you just answer by dropping back your queen. And then in many of these lines, you will actually play pawn to b5, attacking this bishop, again winning a tempo because the bishop has to move. Then we can develop the bishop to b7, and black is really doing fine here. I mean, you have some active diagonals towards the enemy king. In the future, you can also develop your rook here, play a6, play c5, break open the center, put pressure on the queen, put pressure on the king side. So black has some easy plans in those lines. But as I said, most likely they will drop back, keeping this pin on your knight. And this is actually what we want, because these lines are also really good for black. And here we are going to capture this pawn on c4, and often in the Semi-Slav we will capture this pawn here on c4 and we will try to keep it so that we have an extra pawn, and that is the goal here. So we're capturing it because we want to keep it and be up 1 pawn in the opening. So most players with white will respond with pawn to e4 because, well, that's what they have been taught. You play the queen's gambit, you gambit the pawn, and then you play this pawn center and you try to win this back. They can also play pawn to e3, which I will cover in a moment, but probably pawn to e4 is the most played move. And their goal is basically to win back this pawn, but we have a really nice trick here, and that is to play this move pawn to g5. The bishop has to move, and then we're going to play pawn to b5. And now you can see we have this structure, and this is actually defended. This bishop has been kicked back, and now our knight is also active, aiming to win this pawn. And I will continue with this line in a moment, but just to show you that even against this e3 variation, you can also do this. You can play g5, but against e3 it's actually a little bit better to just play pawn to b5 immediately, just create a structure, because there's no real reason here to unpin your knight, because your knight doesn't really have a purpose. There's nothing to attack here on e4, and that is how you can remember this. If there is nothing to attack on e4, you don't have to unpin your knight. So you can just play pawn to b5 and you're just up a full pawn here. Sometimes they can also be sneaky and try to play pawn to a4 because they want to stop us from playing pawn to b5. But here you can play bishop b4, pinning this knight. It's also a bit annoying because this bishop can no longer defend the knight. And if they try to go for this pawn, now we can play pawn to b5, takes, and you will notice since we pinned this knight, it can actually not capture here. So we just have this solid structure and we have an extra pawn. So those are a couple of the main ideas in the Semi-Slav. You want to capture here, you want to protect with b5, you want to play your bishop to b4 to pin the knight. Sometimes you also want to play pawn to g5 to kick away the bishop and then activate your knight if there is something here to attack on e4. So we're going to continue with e4 because that's just the most played variation, so the one that you will see the most. Then we play pawn to g5, and then this structure that I just showed you with pawn to b5 as well. So white will just have to accept here that white is basically down a full pawn in this variation. And black can just play normal developing moves. You can play bishop b7, eyeing up this diagonal, castles, we can develop the knight here, just natural moves. Black will often jump in here, that's the most played variation. White jumps in here. Nothing to worry about. We're going to play bishop to g7, and then we're looking at castling here as well. If white captures, you can just recapture. If they try to go for this push, you can always put your knight in the center. It's not important to study these specific variations, but I just wanted to leave you here with this specific line, which is something you'll probably get the most. And that is just this structure. I mean, we're up a pawn. We got a knight into the center. I mean, in the future, this bishop is going to be strong, especially if we can play something like c5 at some point, breaking open the center, maybe supporting it with a rook, and then this bishop will open up as well. We also have some pressure on this diagonal, so that if white ever tries something like putting the knight in here, that's not really a problem. We can just play f6, and we're going to fight against the center. And white can take, white cannot take, it doesn't really matter. We're going to activate the bishop. And now we have some pawn pushes, pawn e5, pawn c5. You can also drop back here and kick away this knight. So many different options, but black's always just going to be solid up 1 pawn. So that's a really good variation for us. The next thing I wanted to take a look at is, again, our Semi-Slav line. But now, instead of bishop g5, white is going to play bishop to f4. Which is a common theme as well. Again, the same approach by white. They want to close this pawn chain with pawn to e3, but they don't want to lock in their own bishop. So they play bishop to f4 first. That's fine. Again, we're going to capture here on c4 and multiple lines here by white. White can try to play e4, but we're going to play b5. We have already seen this. White can try to play e3, but we're also going to play b5. So we're always up a pawn. The best variation for white is probably to play pawn to a4. Because, well, b5 immediately is not so good. But whenever you face this pawn to a4, the thing I would recommend is always to just pin this knight, because pinning this knight removes a defender, and then we will play b5 in the future. So for example, e3, b5, takes. We have this strong pawn center, white moves the bishop. And then in many lines, you can also jump in with your knight, put pressure here on this knight on c3. And there is an extra advantage. When they have the bishop on f4, playing the knight here is actually a really good move because we both threaten to win material on c3 and also to exchange on f4. So they can solve one of the problems, but then we're just going to take here, damage the structure, isolate the central pawn, develop the bishop on this diagonal. You can always take here, you don't have to take here, but it's not bad to take here, because if you don't, in many lines it's going to be annoying, since white could potentially capture here, but you can also play this move pawn to a6, creating this structure if you want to. That is also a possibility. And black's just doing really well. Again, we're just up a full pawn, and we have an active bishop here. We can develop the knight, we can castle, everything is fine for black. Easy to play position, you are up a full pawn in this line. Then another variation, so again the semi-Slav, and now white's gonna play pawn to e3, which is actually the second most popular move. So instead of getting out the bishop, they're just gonna close it inside the pawn chain and play pawn to e3. A little bit more passive, a little bit more boring maybe by white, but still we have some interesting lines. Against this, basically you can do a lot of things as black, because white's not really trying anything too fancy, so you have time as black to play many different things. You can even continue with the main ideas, I mean knight here, bishop here, maybe c5 push, castles, but I have a really interesting approach that I would recommend against this e3 pawn push, and that is to immediately play your knight into e4. This is a line they are not really used to as white, so really interesting approach. And basically we are going to try to take over the center from white, because white's not doing all they can to take the center, so we're going to try and take the center from them. Taking here by white is not so good, because well, we can capture with the pawn, this knight has to move back, and then we're just going to play a pawn to f5. And black has a really solid structure here in the center, and it's white who's basically already a little bit struggling here to find good moves. And black can even break open the center with a move like pawn to c5. Capturing this is not really good, because well, white would be helping us. So maybe knight b3 we can take, and the white center is actually quite weak, and we as black are just gonna castle. We always have this solid structure here, and we will have a good game. But most players, well actually most players do take here, but taking is not a good move. If they know what they are doing, they are probably gonna play something like bishop d3, because then at least they have double pressure on your knight. And against this, we are also going to play a pawn to f5, which is basically the Stonewall defense and the Semi-Slav. And the idea is just to create this structure with your pawns, and now we have a lot of influence over the center, and we also have this really strong centralized knight. Taking here with the knight, of course, runs into a pawn fork, so that is not what white wants to do. Taking here with the bishop is also not good. You can actually capture both ways. I would personally capture with the f-pawn, probably, since that keeps more pawns in the center. But then the knight will have to move, let's say the knight moves, and again, black has this really strong central pressure. So white's probably not going to capture here, if they know what they are doing. You could get something like castles, knight e7, maybe at some point they will take in the center, but we're just going to recapture like this, because in general in the Semi-Slav we want to build our pawn chain towards the enemy king if we can. And it's really up to white to probably try and eliminate a strong knight. They can also jump in here to e5 themselves, but that is why very early on I recommend playing knight e7, so that if white ever jumps in, you can just exchange. And now you are asking them this question like, what is this pawn doing here? I mean, you can attack it with something like queen c7, they probably have to play f4, and now since we forced them to play f4, they can no longer play f3. And our knight in the center is going to be safe, and he will have a home here for a very long time. And that is why in this variation I think it's really important to play an early knight to d7, so you can always exchange this and then prevent them from pushing f3. If they really want to, they can always move the knight back here with the plan basically to take or to play pawn to f3. But you can just develop your bishop, and if they play f3, you have a really crazy attack here. And I think this specific line against pawn e3 is probably the only one that you should kind of memorize the move order, because the specific move order I am showing you is the best move order if you want to get a real advantage. So you're putting your knight in the center, you're backing up with knight d7. If they go here, you can take, everything is fine. And if they go here, we're going to develop the bishop, and then we're going to go for a counter attack. We don't want to be defensive, because here, I mean, in this variation, you can always just trade the knight, but I mean, what is this pawn doing here? White's just going to break open the center. You don't want this. So we're going to do a counter attack. Of course, capturing here is not possible because we have a checkmate. We can take with the bishop, we can put a check with the bishop, and then we have a checkmate pattern like this. So basically white cannot capture. Still, capturing happens in games, but you can always give a checkmate. Most often, probably white will also try to defend this diagonal with something like g3, but g3 doesn't even work because you can just sacrifice the knight. They have to take. Well, if they take, they actually cannot take. If they take, you can take with the queen, and then that's just a basic checkmate in 2. So if they play this pawn to g3, you can just take here, and there's nothing really they can do. The best approach is probably to try and pin your knight like this, but then we can just go all in crazy with pawn to g5. If they capture this, we're going to capture with the bishop, setting up threats here, I mean, and then we're just going to blast everything open, activate the rook, and black is going to have a checkmate in those lines. So the best defense by white is actually to play pawn to f4. And again, this is the same idea. We are forcing them to play the pawn to f4 by being aggressive. And now our knight has a new home here because pawn to f3 is no longer possible. Pawn to d3 is also not possible. So our knight is basically just safe in the center because we played this aggressive approach with the queen out. And things are not even over. And these lines, we do have some crazy attacking chances as well. We are going to capture here actually with the knight. And you might think, why would you capture? I mean, you've been talking about keeping your knight safe in the center. Well, just let me show you this one variation. We're going to capture this because this knight is annoying. This knight can always go back to f3 and attack our queen. And we want to keep the queen here for checkmates. So we're just going to eliminate the defender. And now it's really hard for white to get pieces to the defense of this king. I mean, the bishops cannot really get there anyway. The queen can go, the knight can go, but everything is a bit jumbled up. And white's lacking space here. And white doesn't really have a good defense. So we're going to go all in with the attack and use this fact that white's just going to be too slow to defend. So for example, knight f6, queen c2. And that's also one of the reasons we have a good home for the knight here. So we can just exchange for their best knight, and then we can move our worst knight into this square. And now we just have a new centralized knight. White can and probably should take this. Afterwards we're going to take, and you can just see what I've been talking about all along. We are creating this beautiful pawn chain towards the enemy king, and now all of our pieces are going to open up towards this king side, and we will have a quite devastating attack. The bishop has to move, it's under attack, and we're going to go all in. We're not even going to castle here. We're going to play pawn to g5, and black has amazing attacking chances here. Capturing, of course, is losing because, well, you can go queen takes, king moves, and then checkmate. So rather easy win. So white cannot capture you. And basically white cannot do anything. They might try to start the counter attack here. They might also play bishop here, but that doesn't really matter. You can move back the queen, keep the threat. So that's also fine. And if they are a bit careless, you will be able to capture here. And then now we're just going to activate the rook. And we're going to go all in for checkmate. And there's no immediate checkmate here, but you can already tell that, well, we have these bishops here, we have this rook here, and it's black who is really putting a lot of pressure. And if white plays a little bit slow, for example, if they just play a random move, or if they play something with the queen or whatever, you basically have queen h3, threatening checkmate here. Kind of forcing them to play this move pawn to g3, which is what we want, because now we're going to go all in with this, and white's just losing. Let's say white tries to defend, we're going to play this. Of course they cannot capture. What are they going to do? Maybe play the rook here. We can take, I mean, what are they going to do? Capturing with the pawn is losing. Capturing with the rook is also devastating because we basically have this. If the king moves here, that's actually an immediate checkmate as well. here, and if the king moves to the corner, we are gonna give another check. At some point we are probably gonna play the bishop out, and then we're gonna castle, and then we're gonna activate the rook, and it's gonna be checkmate. And if they capture with the pawn, that's also quite devastating. We can capture with the rook, basically the same line. Even if they start running with the king, I'm sacrificing this, but white cannot capture it. So amazing lines. If you use the Stonewall defense system, you're gonna have a really good time. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is this. What to do if white captures you immediately. And the answer here is basically black doesn't have a lot, and white also doesn't have a lot. This is going to be quite a symmetrical position. Knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, bishop out, pawn, bishop out. I mean, of course there are other variations as well, but everything here is going to be really symmetrical, and symmetrical usually means a draw. At the same time, if you could get a draw always with black against anyone, you would probably take it, because that's not a bad deal. Also, what I like about these lines is you can always be a little bit more tricky if you want. Instead of copying them, you can try to play a small slight difference, like for example pushing this, so they cannot pin you, and now they gotta play something like bishop here, or maybe bishop e2. And then we're gonna play e6, and now we're gonna be the ones potentially developing the bishop here, since they did not play this pawn. And you can play to create really small differences in your positions, try to get a small edge, and then grind it out as a strategic battle. That is also possible. If you enjoyed this video, definitely subscribe to the channel. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.